I recently completed a project where I made a web accessible organization chart, and I used an aria tree view in React, and I wanted to share my process on how I completed the task. So let's get started. The first thing I did is I reviewed the aria best practices for tree views. So anytime you're going to create a widget that has aria role, I always refer to these best practices. So let's take a look at them. So WAI, ARIA, and the W3C authored these best practices guides on how to use ARIA. And it's got some interesting information in here. And it the first thing it says is no ARIA is better than bad ARIA. So if you don't support all of the features that the screen readers need in order to implement your widget, then you should just not use any ARIA role, because like it says in Principle 1, ARIA role is a promise that the developer built in all the functionality into the widget that the screen reader will understand and work with. So after I'm done reviewing this documentation, I'll check out the examples for the role that I'm going to use. In this case, I use the tree view role. So this documentation is really good and really explicit on how to implement a tree view using ARIA, and covers all the best practices for it. And in order to fulfill this promise, we have to make sure that all of these things are used and that all of this keyboard functionality is built into the widget. For this widget, I didn't use a multi-select tree. It's only a single select tree. But also another thing to understand with ARIA is there's basically three things that you have to control when using ARIA. The ARIA role, which in this case is tree view, and then the sublist items will have ARIA roles of tree item. You have to control the state, let the user know if the view is expanded or collapsed, and the properties of the tree view, like what level it is, things like that. And all of that for a tree view is outlined here in this section of the document. It also shows a couple of examples. So let's take a look at the examples. So here this outlines a couple of design patterns that they use, and it also has the source code down here at the bottom, which is really useful, the CSS, the JavaScript, and the HTML source code. And I kind of started with this as my template and built onto it from here using React. So here's the example of what they have, and this has keyboard functionality. So right now I'm moving the mouse keys to move up and down inside here. You can also click on it. It manages focus, state, and all of these things. And all of the use is outlined under here in keyboard support, and then how it manages the role, property, state, and tab index. So kind of what I did with this documentation is I copied it right into my project so I'd have it right there, and then I just fulfilled each one of these things one at a time as I went through. So then after I fully reviewed the ARIA best practices, I created the app, and you can download and build it yourself if you want to play around with it. In order to use the org chart, it requires that you have Node and Yarn installed locally, and here are links on how to get them. The org chart itself is at my GitHub repo. So if you just go to the GitHub repo, and then we'll just download it as a zip file, or you can clone it to a GitHub or clone it using Git. But for now, we'll just download it here, and then I'll extract this. Right to my desktop. And then I'll just open this zip file up and go in here and then we'll just open up a shell. And from here, you just type npm install, and that will install the requirements. So after it's all done installing the dependencies, then just type yarn run dev to start up the dev server, and then it will start a dev server at this location. So let's just go there and take a look at it. So this is the project, and this is the org chart itself. I'll get into the code in a little bit, but for right now I'll go into how I tested the org chart that I built. So one of the first things I do, and I actually do it while I'm building, is test it with a Wave plugin from WebAIM. So if you go to the output file and you run the Wave plugin, it'll show you any accessibility errors and alerts, and this is an automated testing tool that will show you if there's any accessibility issues with your page. Well, it will show you some of the accessibility issues with the page. You still have to manually test it with a keyboard and check it with a screen reader. But the nice thing about this tool is it shows you the aria labels that are in things. It shows you the aria attributes. So like this little chevron is aria hidden equals true, because there's no reason to announce that to a screen reader. And it just goes through all that. So it's a good sign that we have 0 errors, 0 alerts. That means that it passes this part of the testing process. So then the next thing I'll do is I'll test it with the W3C validator, just to make sure all of my markup is valid. Having poor markup can affect how the screen reader kind of parses the page. So using React, you don't want the source code for the file, because that's just like a JavaScript thing, but you actually want the HTML that it outputs. So I usually do that by direct input. So I'll just copy all this HTML and then come to the markup validator and put this in. Put that in and then check it, and then review the errors that it has. So this error is actually from a React plugin that I'm using, so we'll ignore that error. It doesn't have anything to do with the markup on the page. It's just the plugin injects some stuff. So there's no errors on this page at all. There's a couple of these warnings, but they're pretty minor warnings. It's just the type attribute for JavaScript is not necessary, and React puts that in when it puts the JavaScript in. So there's not really much we can do about that. Overall, it's very good. So then the next thing I'll do is I'll test it with a screen reader, and the screen reader I'm going to be using is NVDA for Windows, and you can download that here. So I'll just start up my screen reader, and I'll show you what a screen reader looks like. So NVDA is started up, and then I'll go to the page.
File aria tree sources aria tree.
I usually go to the header and then refresh the page.
Aria tree view with React. Main landmark.
So it took me right to the main landmark on the page, but if you just arrow down,
view clickable.
you can read through the page.
Tree view clickable. Heading level 2 org chart. Press the tab key to enter the tree view.
So there it tells you if you press the tab key from here, you can enter the tree view. So we'll just do that.
Org chart tree view key function enter or space performs the default action left paren. E.G on click event right paren for the focused node. Down arrow moves focus to the next node that.
So there I have it set to aria describe by and basically the keyboard support table. This could be a little bit annoying if you use this page a lot, but for someone coming to the page for the first time, it lets them know that the table, the org chart supports all of the aria role properties. So then I'll just test it with that. So the right arrow key.
CEO James King. Expanded.
So it lets the screen reader know that this node is expanded, and then if you arrow down into
Level
it,
2 Julie Taylor Dash Associate Director 1 of 5.
it'll tell you the level that you're at and where you're at in the list. So this is telling me that 5 people report to James King, and this is Julie Taylor, the one, and if I hit arrow down again, I'll go to the second person that reports to James
Eugene
King.
Lee Dash CFO 2 of 5 level 2.
So, and then I'm at level 2, I'm on the second element in the list. If I arrow down again.
Software Architect John Williams collapsed 3 of 5 level 2.
So this tells me this is collapsed. So if I hit the enter or space key, it'll expand it. And because it's collapsed, I know that people report to him. So
Software Architect John Williams Ray Moore Dash VP of Engineering Paul Jones Dash VP of Sales Paula Gates Dash QA Manager.
So if
Expanded.
I hit the enter key, it lets me know that this area expanded, and it lets me know all of the people that report to him. And then if I hit the arrow down
List.
again,
Level 3 Ray Moore Dash VP of Engineering 1 of 3.
it lets me know that I entered a list and that where I'm at in the org chart level.
Paul Jones Dash VP of Sales 2 of 3 level 3.
So I'm at level 3 in the org chart, so I know I started at CEO James King, I went into John Williams, and I'm there. If I want to collapse this, I can just arrow
Level
left.
2 Software Architect John Williams Ray Moore Dash VP of Engineering Paul Jones Dash VP of Sales Paula Gates Dash QA Manager.
That'll take me to the node, and then if I hit arrow left again, it'll collapse this node.
Software Architect John Williams. Collapsed.
And if you hit a tab from here, it'll take you out.
View Site Information menu button.
And then if I
Press in search bar. Select Downloads bar grouping. Aria tree view with React document. Main landmark org chart tree view.
And then if I hit the tab again,
the default action left paren. E.G on.
It will take me into the org chart right where I left off. And this functionality is important in a tree view because if you don't support all of the keyboard functionality that goes into expanding and collapsing these regions, then all someone will be able to do using a keyboard is just tab to the first node. And I've seen a lot of tree views like that where they don't support all of the aria attributes and roles, and so you can only tab into the first node, and then you have to use the mouse to expand and collapse the other regions. And for someone using a screen reader, basically all that content is not accessible to them. So we've followed aria best practices for implementing this org chart so that all of this content is accessible to a screen reader. And it's accessible to someone only using a keyboard also. So that's how I test the org chart using the screen reader. So now I'll just shut off the screen
Notification
reader.
overflow. NVDA, exit NVDA dialog.
And I also listed out the keyboard support down here. It's not a requirement, but I just did it just for this one thing, so someone using this will know how to interact with it using just the keyboard. So that's how I test it. If you're using Mac, you can use VoiceOver. And now let's just take a look at the code. So so the reason I chose React is when I started looking at the aria states that need to be required, I thought something like React would be really good because it manages all the states. And basically it's just got a plain index file here that doesn't do much except add a couple divs that React will interject the code into. The instructions one, which shows the keyboard instructions, and then the root for the actual app itself. So the first thing I do is get all of the data, and I just use this kind of JSON data file that I've picked up somewhere along the way. I can't remember. There was a project I saw that used it and used those images, so I just kind of followed along with that. And then just as test data. So import the test data and then send it to this tree viewed node. So this is the tree view, and I fully commented in here. Basically the comments straight from the aria documentation, best practices documentation, and then I just, as I built it, went through and made sure that I checked off each one of these things from aria best practices. So this thing only receives one argument, a node's argument, and then I set the state of the node in here. I also use this, which is the current active element, and so this TID value is the current active ID of the element that's got focus. Because one of the tricky things in here is you have to manage focus. So move focus up and down, pass it from one element to another. So that was one of the more difficult things, I would think, in the aria requirements, is to manage the focus state. So I support a bunch of on-click events with a mouse, which normally some things may only have just this one, and they don't support the keyboard events. And then that makes it basically useless for someone with a screen reader. It'll only support like a mouse keyboard click event or a mouse hover over state or something like that. But I have a little helper function here that just sets the visible state, so it basically hides and shows the elements in the sublists and collapses them and stuff like that. This move focus was required basically because there's a lot of focus management going on in here, and you have to, so I made this little helper function for that, and focus event and blur event. So when you're moving into and out of the focus state, just to make sure that I set the state of the current nodes. This is just a helper function to search the chart in reverse. And then these are all of the key press events that are supported, and these are straight from the aria best practices documentation. The space key is supported, the enter key, the arrow down key, the up arrow key, the right arrow key, the left arrow key, and all of this stuff needs to be built in just like it's spelled out of the aria best practices. So this isn't really a React thing. It's mostly just JavaScript. But then here's the real React render. So I basically search the nodes and find the root elements, and then render those root elements. So these are this function kind of is a wrapper around the outside. It sets up the H2 and the unordered list, and then renders the root elements. So inside the root elements, we have a aria role of tree item. Oh, I should probably come up to here. So the H2 is the tree label, and aria labeled by equals tree label. It's got an ID on it. It has a role of tree. So this announces to the screen reader when they come into this section that it's a tree, and it has all of these events attached to it. So then the items within the tree are tree items, and they have aria attributes of the size. So this is the length of the element. So these root elements, I only had 2 of them, so this would be like the number 2. The aria position, this would be number 1 because it's the first element, and then the aria level would be number 1 because it's the first one. And then as you go into sub levels, it announces to the screen reader just where they're at. And that's really important because you could get totally lost inside lists with sublists, with sublists, with sublists. And screen readers can kind of try and best guess at where they're at, but they don't do a very good job. So I think it's good to declare this right in here, so you let the person know just exactly where they're at in the sublists. Because with nested lists, it can be very tricky to navigate and just know where you're at and understand the meaning of the information that's being given to you. So, and then this just so if this has a sublist or a sublist, it will render that and give it the aria property of group. So this here will just look and see if it's a group or if it's an item. If it's another subgroup, it will render this the group, which also has the aria expanded state. So that's how you announce to the screen reader if it's expanded or collapsed. And so on and so forth. Again, the aria set size, the reference which is needed so that you can move focus to this element, and then this is just HTML, and then this is a tree item. So if it's just a tree item, it doesn't have a subgroup, it's just an individual, and so it doesn't have to worry about the aria expanded, but it just sets the position in the list. So that's it. That's how I used React to create a web accessible org chart and follow ARIA best practices. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed.